It was 8:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser USS Augusta, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley stood watching his army die. Through binoculars smeared with a film of salt spray, he peered at the strip of coastline known as Omaha Beach, or rather, at what was left of it. The scene was apocalyptic. Bodies bobbed in the surf by the hundreds. Landing craft burned at the water's edge, belching columns of black smoke into the gray sky. The soldiers who had miraculously made it to the sand lay motionless, huddled behind steel anti-tank obstacles, pinned down by German machine guns that had not ceased firing since dawn. Bradley, the commander of American ground forces, had promised these men that naval bombardment would obliterate the German defenses before their boots even touched French soil. He had assured them they would face only demoralized, second-rate German troops. The reality was brutal. 2,000 of his men were already dead or dying right now, before his eyes. In that moment, Bradley was contemplating the unthinkable. Evacuation, giving the order to retreat, pulling the survivors off this bloody beach and redirecting the follow-up waves to Utah Beach or the British sector at Gold. Essentially, admitting that the greatest American assault in history had failed before it had properly begun. What Bradley did not know, and could not know from his position 8 miles offshore, was that somewhere in that chaos, in the very center of hell, a 51-year-old general with a bad heart and a walking cane was at that exact moment changing the course of history. To understand the depth of the crisis on Omaha Beach, one must rewind the clock. The British had doubted the Americans from the very beginning. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, chief of the Imperial General Staff and the professional head of the British Army, kept a private diary throughout the war. On its pages, he recorded his unfiltered thoughts about strategy, about Churchill, and about the American allies whose entry into the war had saved Britain from almost certain defeat. Brooke respected American industrial power. The factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh were churning out tanks, aircraft, and ammunition at rates the Germans could not dream of matching. But American soldiers were another matter entirely. In Brooke's view, they lacked the combat experience that British troops had earned through blood over 2 years of fighting in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. American generals, he believed, were dangerously naive and did not fully understand the monster of the Wehrmacht they were about to face. This skepticism was not born of personal malice. It was institutional memory born of trauma. The British had watched the French army, considered the strongest in Europe, collapse in just 6 weeks in 1940. They had survived the humiliation of Dunkirk, evacuating their forces with their backs to the sea. They had lost Singapore and Tobruk. Caution had become their religion. And against this backdrop, the Americans, with their boundless optimism and soldiers who had never seen a German panzer division in open battle, seemed to the British like amateurs walking to their slaughter. Winston Churchill shared these fears. As late as February 1944, just 4 months before the invasion, he was still questioning the entire operation. "Why are we trying to do this?" he demanded in meetings. He proposed alternatives. Norway, the Mediterranean, the Balkans, anywhere but a direct frontal assault on the most heavily fortified coastline in the world. British doctrine favored a war of attrition. Wear Germany down through bombing, through peripheral strikes, let the Soviets bleed the Wehrmacht dry on the Eastern Front. Only when the German beast was weakened should the Allies risk crossing the Channel. The Americans disagreed vehemently. General George Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, demanded a concentration of force at the decisive point. Strike the enemy in the heart. End the war quickly. Stop the killing. This fundamental rift defined every aspect of the planning. The British wanted more time, more preparation, more guarantees. The Americans wanted action. The deadlock was finally broken by Joseph Stalin. At the Tehran Conference in November 1943, the Soviet leader backed Roosevelt, demanding a firm date for the invasion. Outnumbered, Churchill reluctantly agreed. May 1944. Later, the date was pushed to June due to a shortage of landing craft. But even when the date was set, British doubts did not vanish. Would the Americans stand firm under real fire? Would their generals panic when plans collapsed? Did these young boys from Iowa, Texas, and California have the discipline and courage to storm concrete bunkers defended by SS veterans? June 6th was to provide the final answer. The relationship between British and American officers before D-Day was a complex mix of history and culture. British officers had been fighting since 1939. They had endured the fall of France, the Blitz, the disasters of Greece and Crete, the grinding campaign in the desert. They had lost friends, colleagues, entire divisions. They had learned cruel lessons about German professionalism. American officers had entered the war only in December 1941. Most had never heard a shot fired in anger until the landings in North Africa in late 1942. Even the veterans of Sicily were considered green by British standards. This experience gap created friction. British officers often treated their American counterparts like schoolboys needing instruction. Americans, in turn, resented British condescension. The alliance was real, but so was the tension. General Bernard Montgomery embodied these contradictions. He genuinely respected Eisenhower as supreme commander, but deep down, he believed he understood ground warfare better than Ike ever could. In Monty's eyes, the Americans had potential, but they needed a British guide. Bradley, who was to command American ground forces under Montgomery, felt this disdain viscerally. Montgomery left me with the feeling that I was a poor country cousin he had to tolerate, Bradley later wrote. But there was another side to the coin. In the spring of 1944, Montgomery toured American training camps in England. He spoke directly to the common soldiers without notes, and this contact surprised even his own staff. The troops greeted him warmly. Whatever Monty thought of American generals, he saw a spark in the American soldiers. These were young men willing to fight. They had crossed an ocean to liberate a continent they had never seen. They believed in their cause with an intensity that sometimes unsettled cynical British officers. The only question was, would belief be enough when the bullets started flying? The plan for Omaha Beach was built on assumptions that turned out to be fatally wrong. Army intelligence reported that the beach was defended by a single regiment of the German 716th Static Infantry Division. These were second-rate troops, older reservists and foreign conscripts deemed unfit for the Eastern Front. Planners expected light resistance. What they did not know was that the battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division had been moved into the area in March. This was a different beast entirely. Younger soldiers, a corps of veteran officers and NCOs who had survived the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, excellent equipment and high morale. The second fatal error was the reliance on bombardment. Heavy bombers were supposed to crater the beach, creating foxholes for the infantry. Naval guns were supposed to smash the bunkers. Neither happened. Cloud cover on the morning of June 6 forced pilots to delay their bomb release by a few seconds to avoid hitting Allied ships. Because of this delay, tons of explosives fell not on the beach, but on the empty fields behind the German lines. The German positions remained untouched. The naval bombardment lasted only 40 minutes. Rear Admiral John Hall had pleaded for hours of sustained fire, but he was overruled. "It is a crime to send me on the biggest amphibious attack in history with such inadequate naval gunfire support," he said. He was right. And finally, the tanks. 32 amphibious Sherman DD tanks were supposed to land with the first wave to suppress enemy fire. But the English Channel was merciless. 5-foot swells swamped the fragile canvas screens of the tanks. In the eastern sector of Omaha, 27 out of 29 tanks went to the bottom before reaching the shore. Their crews drowned inside their steel coffins. The men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions stepped onto the beach with no armor, no air support, and facing an enemy exponentially stronger than expected. The slaughter began instantly. Many died before they could even exit the landing craft. German machine gunners had pre-sighted the ramps. As soon as the steel doors dropped, a swarm of lead flew inside. Those who survived the ramps jumped into water over their heads, weighed down by equipment. Some drowned within feet of the beach. Company A of the 116th Regiment landed directly in front of a German strongpoint. Within 10 minutes, the company had suffered 96% casualties. Out of 200 men, fewer than 20 reached the seawall. There were no bomb craters to hide in. The beach was as flat as a table. Men pressed themselves into the sand, paralyzed by shock. The wounded cried out for medics who could not reach them. According to the schedule, by 8:30 the troops should have been a mile inland. 6 hours into the operation, they held a pitiful 10 yards of pebbles. Brigadier General Norman Cota landed on Omaha at 7:30, 1 hour after the first wave. He was 51 years old, the assistant commander of the 29th Division, and one of the highest-ranking officers on the beach that day. His landing craft came under fire on the approach. 3 soldiers were killed exiting the boat. Cota had opposed the daylight landing from the start. He had pleaded with command to attack under the cover of darkness, believing tactical surprise was the only chance. He was ignored, assured that the power of the Navy would compensate for everything. Now, standing on a beach littered with corpses, Cota realized the staff plans were worthless. So he began to improvise. While others crawled, Cota walked upright. He strode through the fire as if German bullets could not touch him. He moved from group to group, lifting shocked soldiers, pointing his cane toward the bluffs, shouting orders. Near the seawall, he encountered soldiers from the 5th Ranger Battalion pinned down. "What outfit is this?" he asked. "5th Rangers," someone shouted back. Cota's response became legend. "Well, God damn it, if you are Rangers, lead the way." That phrase would become the motto of the U.S. Army Rangers. But in that moment, it was simply the cry of a desperate commander demanding his men stop dying and start killing. Cota demonstrated what cannot be taught in a classroom: leadership by example. A soldier nearby held a Bangalore torpedo, a pipe filled with explosives to clear wire. Cota ordered him to blow a gap. The explosion opened a breach. The first man who tried to run through was killed by a sniper. The others froze. Cota did not freeze. He stepped into the breach himself and began to climb the hill. When he looked back, he saw men following him. First a few, then dozens. By noon, the beach had ceased to be a slaughterhouse and had become a foothold. While Bradley considered evacuation, the Navy decided to act. Destroyers, which by regulation were supposed to stay at a distance, moved in dangerously close to the shore, within 800 yards. They risked running aground, but the captains didn't care. A message came from the battleship USS Texas. "Get on them, men. They are raising hell with the men on the beach, and we can't have any more of that." The destroyers opened fire at point-blank range into the bunker embrasures. They fired until their gun barrels glowed red. Colonel Mason, Chief of Staff of the 1st Division, later said, "I am firmly convinced that our supporting naval fire got us in. Without their gunfire, we positively could not have crossed the beaches." At Utah Beach, 15 miles to the west, a different drama was unfolding. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of the former president, was the oldest man to land in the first wave. He was 56. He walked with a cane due to severe arthritis from wounds in World War I, and he hid a serious heart condition from the doctors. 3 times he had been denied permission to land with the first wave. On the 4th attempt, he was approved, with his superiors fully expecting him to die there. Roosevelt understood the psychology of the soldier. Men fight better when they see their general beside them in the mud. But something unexpected happened. The current drifted their landing craft 2,000 yards south of the intended target. Landing in the wrong place, Roosevelt looked around and spoke the sentence that saved hundreds of lives. "We'll start the war from right here." Instead of trying to fight back to the original landing zone under fire, he changed the plan on the fly, directing troops inland along new routes. He survived that day, but 5 weeks later, his heart stopped right there in Normandy. He died with his men, never knowing he had been awarded the Medal of Honor. German defenders on Omaha were also in shock, but for a different reason. They watched the Americans walking into certain death. Heinrich Severloh, a machine gunner with the 352nd Division, fired, by his own account, over 13,000 rounds that day. He watched waves of attackers fall and was convinced he would drive the invasion back into the sea. German logic dictated, every army has a breaking point, a level of casualties after which an attack collapses. The Americans on Omaha crossed that threshold in the first hour. But they did not stop. The Germans faced a problem they hadn't foreseen. They were running out of ammunition faster than the Americans were running out of men. Individual soldiers broke, Units were decimated, but new ones took their place. This stubbornness, bordering on madness, broke the will of the defenders. If these men could not be stopped by such slaughter, what could possibly stop them? By the evening of June 6th, the 352nd Division had lost 20% of its strength and all its reserves. Positions that seemed impregnable had fallen. Rommel was right. If the Allies gained a foothold, Germany would lose the war. They had gained the foothold. The consequences of D-Day went far beyond tactics. For the British, it was a moment of truth. The skepticism that had poisoned the alliance for years didn't vanish completely, but it transformed. The Americans had proven they could fight. They had proven they could die without retreating. Alan Brooke continued to criticize American tactics in his diary, considering them chaotic. But even he admitted, the Americans learn fast. They adapt. They do not repeat mistakes. This day changed the balance of power. Before June 6th, the British viewed the Americans as junior partners. After June 6th, that view was impossible. The U.S. Army had become the dominant force in Western Europe. Montgomery personally pinned the Distinguished Service Order on General Cota, a rare honor for a foreigner. It was official recognition that an American general had displayed exceptional valor. The American soldiers, considered green and inexperienced, became veterans in a single morning. Those who survived Omaha were no longer clerks and farmers. They were a force that, a year later, would cross the Rhine. General Norman Cota fought through the rest of the war, commanding a division in the Battle of the Bulge, and quietly retired. His obituary in 1971 said almost nothing about his role on Omaha Beach. But his men remembered. They told their children about the old man with the cane who walked through bullets. Efforts to upgrade his Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor continue to this day. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. lies in the American Cemetery in Normandy, next to his brother who died in World War I. His grave overlooks the beach he took. Omar Bradley, who became a 5-star general, repeated until the end of his days, "Every man who set foot on Omaha Beach that day is a hero." The result of that day is carved in stone on the cliffs of Normandy. 9,389 graves. White crosses and stars of David. Rows stretching into infinity. The British generals who had watched the landing with doubt saw something there that silenced them. They saw an army that had never fought the Wehrmacht take a blow that would have made others run, and continue moving forward. The alliance between Britain and America was never perfect. They argued, competed, and envied each other's glory. But on June 6, 1944, they shared a beach. And on that beach, in a fire that killed thousands, they proved their alliance could break the back of Nazism. The British doubted the Americans. Then they saw the Americans fight. And the doubt was replaced by respect. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who values history. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories about the Second World War. Each of these stories deserves to be remembered. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans the globe. Thank you for watching.